Dinners were crucial for my upcoming promotion. I was about to share my insights on our recent efficiency improvements when my wife cleared her throat beside me. "Actually, honey," she interrupted, her voice sweet but her eyes sharp. "I think you mean logistics optimization, not efficiency improvements. The terminology matters to these executives, doesn't it?" She smiled at my boss and colleagues, who exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the first time this month. It was becoming a pattern, one that was increasingly difficult to ignore. What had started as occasional helpful suggestions had morphed into a full-blown public correction campaign over the past 4 weeks. As I was saying, I continued, maintaining my composure despite feeling my face flush with heat. Our new routing system has decreased delivery times by 17%. But before I could elaborate further, she placed her hand on my forearm. "You're gesturing too much with your hands, dear. Remember what we discussed about executive presence." She demonstrated a more controlled posture, as if teaching a child how to behave. My boss shifted in his seat. His wife gave me a sympathetic look. The silence at the table was deafening until my senior colleague awkwardly changed the subject. Later that evening, as we pulled into our driveway, I turned off the engine and sat still for a moment. The tension between us was palpable. For years we had been married, and somehow we'd arrived at this bizarre dynamic where she'd appointed herself my public handler. "We need to talk about what happened tonight," I said firmly, looking straight ahead through the windshield. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice suddenly defensive. "You corrected me 5 times during a 2-hour dinner with my boss and team. Do you realize how that comes across?" She scoffed, gathering her purse. "I was helping you. Your promotion is on the line, and first impressions matter. Your posture was slouched. You were using imprecise language. And you told that story about college that made you sound unprofessional. That unprofessional story was about how I developed a routing algorithm that saved the company millions," I replied, feeling my jaw tighten. "And my posture is fine. It always has been." "Look," she sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a stubborn child. "You're just sensitive because it's important to you. I'm helping you put your best foot forward. My father always says perception is reality in business." Her father, the successful corporate attorney who had never quite thought I was good enough for his daughter, the man whose approval she still desperately sought at 32. "There's a difference between private feedback and public correction," I said, keeping my voice measured despite my rising anger. "One is respectful, the other is humiliating." "Humiliating?" She laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "You're overreacting. This is what couples do. They help each other improve." I stepped out of the car and stood to my full height, something I found myself doing more consciously lately whenever we disagreed. "No. This is what you've been doing consistently for the past month, and it stops now." She rolled her eyes as she brushed past me toward the front door. "If you can't handle constructive criticism, that's your problem, not mine." That night, lying awake beside her sleeping form, I replayed similar incidents from the past month. The neighborhood barbecue where she corrected my grilling techniques in front of everyone, the movie night with friends where she edited my opinions on the film, yesterday at the grocery store when she adjusted my grip on the shopping cart as if I were incompetent. When had this started? When had I begun to feel like a project rather than a partner? The promotion I was working toward would mean significantly more responsibility and a substantial pay increase. We had discussed using that money toward a down payment on a larger home, one in the neighborhood she had been subtly pushing for, closer to her aspirational social circle than our current modest suburb. As her soft snores filled our bedroom, a disturbing thought crystallized. What if this behavior wasn't really about helping me improve? What if this was about molding me into something that fit her vision of where she wanted to be? I turned onto my side, away from her, and made a decision. This pattern needed to be addressed. Not with anger or wounded pride, but with clear, unmistakable boundaries. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would begin to reclaim the respect that had been slowly eroding in our relationship. What I didn't realize then was that her campaign of corrections was just beginning, and that my patience had an expiration date that was rapidly approaching. The weekend after that disastrous dinner arrived with perfect early summer weather. Our neighbor had invited the entire block to his annual barbecue. Under normal circumstances, I would have looked forward to it, cold beers, good conversation, and a chance to unwind. Instead, I felt a knot of tension forming as we walked across the street. "Remember to mingle with everyone," Not just the guys from your softball league, she whispered, straightening my collar unnecessarily. And please use the small talk topics we practiced. I gave her a look that said enough but kept walking. Choose your battles, I reminded myself. The host greeted us with enthusiasm, handing me a beer and pulling us into the backyard where about 30 neighbors had gathered. I spotted my friend from 3 houses down and headed his way when my wife gripped my elbow. Your posture, she hissed quietly. Stand up straight. You're slouching again. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders deliberately, and continued across the lawn. Hey man, how's it going? My neighbor clapped me on the shoulder. Heard you guys might be moving to Lakeside Hills soon. I tilted my head, confused. First, I've heard of it. We're considering a larger place, but nothing specific yet. Before he could respond, my wife appeared at my side with practiced timing. We're actually touring some properties there next weekend. It's all about location when making a smart investment. She smoothly took over the conversation, speaking as though we'd discussed this extensively. We hadn't. When burgers were served, I found myself sitting at a picnic table with several neighbors. The conversation flowed naturally until I reached for the ketchup. Not like that, my wife interrupted, taking the bottle from my hand. You're going to splatter it everywhere. Here, she demonstrated the proper way to pour condiments, as if teaching a kindergartner. The table fell into awkward silence. I've been putting ketchup on burgers for 35 years, I said evenly, taking the bottle back. I think I've got it handled. She laughed, that tinkling laugh she used when trying to diffuse tension she'd created. He hates when I try to help him with the little things. Men and their pride, right, ladies? 2 women exchanged glances, but didn't join her laughter. Later, as conversations broke into smaller groups, I overheard her voice from behind the fence where she was chatting with a neighbor I didn't recognize. It's exhausting sometimes, having to guide him through basic social cues. But that's marriage, isn't it? We all have our projects. Projects? The word landed like a blow. Walking home that evening, I confronted her. What was that comment about touring Lakeside Hills properties? We never discussed that. I've been researching neighborhoods. Lakeside Hills has excellent appreciation potential. I thought you'd be pleased I was taking initiative with our future. Our future involves decisions we make together, I replied. And what's this about a project? Is that how you see me now? Her expression shifted to exasperation. You're not serious. I didn't call you a project. I heard you behind the fence. She waved dismissively. You misunderstood the context. Besides, everyone knows couples help refine each other. Remember how you used to bite your nails before we met? There was no point continuing. She would rewrite history rather than acknowledge her behavior. Monday morning, I called in late to work and followed her after she left the house. My suspicion had been growing that something specific had triggered this behavioral shift. She drove to an upscale coffee shop in the neighboring town, where she met another woman. Through the window, I watched them review something on an iPad, my wife taking notes enthusiastically. I texted a mutual friend who might know what was happening. Oh, she didn't tell you? Came the reply. She's been taking that refined living course with Heather Richardson, you know, the banker's wife. It's some exclusive social refinement program. Costs a fortune. Things suddenly clicked into place. Heather Richardson lived in Lakeside Hills, drove a Mercedes, and was married to the regional bank president. Exactly the type of social circle my wife had been mentioning with increasing frequency. At home that evening, I searched her browser history while she showered and found the course website, Elevate Your Circle, Social Refinement for Aspiring Couples. The description made my stomach turn. Transform your partner and yourself into the power couple you were meant to be. I closed the laptop as the shower stopped. So that was it. I wasn't a husband. I was a social climbing accessory that needed polishing. That night, 3 neighbors texted to check if I was okay. One message particularly stood out, been married 22 years. What I saw today wasn't normal or healthy. Nobody deserves to be managed like that. As I lay awake, I realized this wasn't just about annoying corrections anymore. This was about fundamental respect, and a decision about what kind of man I was going to be in this relationship. The following day's schedule showed a family lunch with her parents. If patterns held, it would be another opportunity for her to showcase her project. But this time, I'd be watching with new understanding. The question wasn't whether she would try to correct me again. The question was how I would respond. Sunday lunch at my in-laws' sprawling suburban home had once been tolerable, even occasionally enjoyable. Today, it felt like walking into an evaluation chamber. After discovering the social refinement course, I was on high alert, watching for the dynamics at play. Her father greeted me with his typical firm handshake and assessing gaze. Her mother embraced me with perfumed enthusiasm, while subtly inspecting my choice of attire. I had deliberately dressed casually, clean jeans and an untucked button-down, knowing it would create an opportunity for observation. "Couldn't find a proper shirt for Sunday lunch?" my wife whispered, as we followed her parents to the patio. I simply smiled. "I'm perfectly appropriate for a family lunch." Her father poured drinks while her mother brought out appetizers. We settled into the patio furniture, and I intentionally engaged her father about his recent fishing trip, a topic I genuinely enjoyed. "That stretch of river has some of the best bass fishing in the state," I commented, leaning forward with interest. "Did you try the new lures I mentioned last time?" Before her father could answer, my wife interjected. "Don't interrogate Dad about fishing details. Not everyone finds that fascinating." She turned to her father with an apologetic smile. "He gets so fixated on technical details." Her father's expression flickered with confusion. "Actually, I was about to show him photos of the 16-incher I caught using exactly those lures." Awkward silence descended, broken when her mother announced lunch was ready. As we moved to the dining table, I caught her father studying me with an unreadable expression. The pattern continued through the meal. When I offered to help clear dishes, she corrected my stacking technique. When I complimented her mother's cooking, she interrupted to clarify what I meant to say. When her father and I discussed an upcoming baseball game, she redirected the conversation to more sophisticated topics her parents might enjoy. After dessert, her mother asked her to help select plants for the garden, leaving me alone with her father for the first time that day. I expected him to retreat to his study as usual, but instead he gestured toward the garage. "Help me check something on the boat," he said, rising from his chair. In the garage, he busied himself examining the motor while I waited, sensing he had something to say. "Known you for what, 6 years now?" He finally spoke, not looking up from the engine. "About that, yes, sir. You've always been straightforward. Respectful, but not a pushover. Spoke your mind without being rude about it." He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's happening with my daughter?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He fixed me with the steady gaze of a man who'd negotiated hundreds of legal settlements. "Don't play dumb, son. This new way she's handling you, correcting everything, managing how you talk to me in my own house. This isn't the dynamic you two had before." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to her father. "Let me save you the trouble," he continued. 32 years ago, I married her mother. 5 years in, she started doing exactly what my daughter is doing to you now, correcting my grammar, my table manners, how I spoke to colleagues." He tossed the rag onto the workbench. "Know what happened? I put up with it for 3 miserable years until I stopped recognizing myself. Then we separated for 8 months. This was family history I'd never heard. What changed? She did, after nearly losing me. Or I did by finally standing up for myself. Maybe both. He leaned against the workbench. But it wasn't easy and we almost didn't make it. Now I'm watching history repeat itself. The drive home was quiet until we turned onto our street. "Your father told me something interesting," I said calmly. "I'm sure he did. Dad loves playing wise patriarch." Her tone was dismissive. "He told me about when your parents separated." Her hands stilled in her lap. "That's ancient history. They're obviously fine now. They separated because your mother treated him the way you've been treating me." She turned sharply. "That's completely different, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, the pattern looks identical." I pulled into our driveway but didn't turn off the engine. "This stops now. The public corrections, the condescension, treating me like I'm some unfinished project you need to polish for your new friends. You're overreacting." "No," I cut her off. "I'm establishing a boundary. I won't be corrected or managed in public, or in private, as if I'm somehow deficient. That's not a partnership, and it's not a marriage I'm interested in continuing if this is the new normal." Her face flushed. "Are you threatening divorce over a few helpful suggestions?" "I'm telling you that a fundamental level of respect is non-negotiable. I married a partner, not a life coach." "This is ridiculous," she muttered, exiting the car. Inside, she disappeared upstairs while I remained in the kitchen, my resolve hardening. Later, she descended with forced cheerfulness, suggesting we watch a movie as if nothing had happened. Classic avoidance, her preferred tactic when confronted directly. "Did you hear what I said earlier?" I pressed. Yes. And you've made your point. She scrolled through streaming options without looking at me. You don't appreciate constructive feedback. Message received. That's not what I said, and you know it. She sighed dramatically. What do you want from me? An apology for trying to help you be your best self? In that moment, I realized this conversation wasn't going to break through. Whatever was driving this behavior ran deeper than I'd initially thought. I want my wife back, I said simply. The one who saw me as an equal, not a project. She stared at the television, jaw tight. People evolve. Maybe you should try it. That night, lying on opposite sides of our bed, I made a decision. Direct confrontation hadn't worked. Now it was time for a different approach, one that would force her to see exactly what she was risking with this new version of herself. The next morning, I woke up with new clarity. Confrontation hadn't worked, but information might. I needed to understand exactly what was happening in her mind and in her private communications. While she showered, I did something I'd never done in 6 years of relationship. I checked her iPad. The password was still my birthday, ironic, given how little regard she seemed to have for me lately. Her messages with Heather Richardson loaded first. What I saw made my blood run cold. He's resistant to the changes my wife had written yesterday. Like you said might happen. Heather's response, they all resist at first. The unrefined always fear refinement. Brian fought me for months, now he's grateful. Your husband will thank you once he sees the doors this opens. I scrolled through weeks of messages, each more disturbing than the last. Think of him as a diamond in the rough. Your job is to cut away the unpolished parts. The hard-drove dinner party is crucial. Gregory's connection to venture capital could transform your husband's career trajectory if he makes the right impression. Sometimes you need to break them down before rebuilding. Trust the process. My wife's replies were equally troubling. It's exhausting constantly correcting him. But I can already see how people view us differently when he follows the protocols. I've started identifying his lower-class speech patterns, working on eliminating them before the charity gala. Had to decline dinner with our old neighborhood friends. They're holding him back. Explained we've outgrown that stage of life. A photo caught my eye. Heather and my wife with 2 other women I didn't recognize, holding wine glasses with the caption "The Elevation Circle," reshaping our futures one husband at a time. I heard the shower stop and quickly closed the messages, feeling physically ill. That evening she announced she'd planned a dinner party for Saturday, just 3 days away. Nothing fancy, just 6 couples, Heather and Brian, some new friends from the club, and Gregory Hardrove and his wife. The name from the messages. This wasn't coincidental. Gregory Hardrove? I asked casually. Don't think I've met him. He's only the managing partner at Vertex Ventures. He's been looking to invest in transportation logistics technology. Perfect connection for you if you make a good impression. She handed me a printed guide. I've outlined appropriate conversation topics and which of your work stories are acceptable. I stared at the document titled Dinner Party Protocol, with bullet points about everything from how to hold my wine glass to approved anecdotes from my career. You created a behavioral script for me. The calm in my voice masked my shock. It's a guide to help you shine. This dinner could change everything for us. Her eyes gleamed with an ambition I barely recognized. For us? Or for you? Her smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I replied, folding the document. Just curious about the endgame here. The next day, I left work early and did something I'd been contemplating for days. I contacted Heather's husband, Brian Richardson. I appreciate you reaching out, he said when we met at a bar far from our neighborhoods. I've been wanting to talk to someone who understands this situation. Brian was impeccably dressed, every hair in place, his posture rigid even on a bar stool. But his eyes held a weariness that belied his polished exterior. How long has your wife been refining you? I asked. He winced at the term. 3 years. Started after I made partner at the firm. Suddenly my background wasn't aligned with our new social position. He sipped his scotch. I grew up working class. My father was a plumber. Apparently that became a liability. And you just accepted it? I fought it at first, then I gave in. Seemed easier. His voice dropped. Now I don't recognize myself most days. Is it worth it? His laugh was hollow. My wife got what she wanted. We're in the right neighborhood, on the right boards, invited to the right events. He straightened his already perfectly straight tie. And I'm a well-dressed ghost in my own life. I returned home disturbed by Brian's living cautionary tale. She was in the kitchen reviewing what appeared to be seating arrangements. I confirmed with Heather today. Gregory is definitely coming. This could be huge for us. Huge for who, exactly? I leaned against the door frame. What's your endgame here? Lakeside Hills? Country club membership? Moving me up the social ladder like a pawn? She looked genuinely confused by my questions. It's about creating opportunities. Why are you fighting this? Because I liked our life before you decided it wasn't good enough. Her expression hardened. We were stagnating. I'm trying to elevate us both. By treating me like a renovation project? I pulled out my phone. The elevation circle, reshaping our futures one husband at a time. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Her face paled seeing the screenshot. You went through my private messages? After weeks of being publicly humiliated? Yes, I did. Those conversations are taken out of context. There is no context where referring to your husband as needing to be broken down is acceptable. She crossed her arms defensively. You don't understand what's at stake. This dinner with Gregory is about using me as a stepping stone for your social ambitions. Her eyes flashed. If you'd cooperate instead of resisting, we could both benefit. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't correcting me because she cared about my growth. She was attempting to erase who I was because she'd grown ashamed of it. I met Brian Richardson today, I said quietly. Genuine shock registered on her face. You what? Fascinating conversation. He told me where this road leads. He also shared something interesting about Heather and her elevation circle. Did you know they've gone through 3 different friend groups in 5 years? Each time abandoning the previous circle once they've outgrown them. She deflated slightly, caught off guard. The dinner stays on the calendar, I said, turning to leave the kitchen. But you should know I won't be following any protocol guide. What does that mean? Alarm edged her voice. It means I'll be there as myself, the unrefined, authentic version you've been trying so hard to erase. As I walked away, I heard her call after me. You're making a huge mistake. Perhaps. But for the first time in weeks, I feel like myself again. The dinner party was 2 days away. By the end of it, one thing would be crystal clear: who I was and what I wasn't willing to become. The 48 hours before the dinner party unfolded with intense preparation. My wife oscillated between cold silence and desperate attempts to coach me for the evening. I deflected each attempt with non-committal responses, focused instead on my own preparations. What she didn't know was that I'd made several calls of my own. First to my company's PR director, an old friend who'd offered media training to executives for 20 years. Then to my college roommate, who now taught advanced communications at the state university. Both agreed to meet me urgently, not to transform me into someone else, but to arm me with the tools to be the most effective version of myself. The key is authentic confidence, the PR director explained during our rush session. Not mimicking what you think these people want to see. My professor friend was more blunt. Your wife wants to turn you into a social climber's accessory. Instead, be the most articulate, self-assured version of yourself. That's what truly commands respect. For 6 intense hours over 2 days, they helped me refine my natural communication style, not by stripping away who I was, but by amplifying my strengths. We practiced conversation techniques, subtle body language, and how to gracefully address uncomfortable situations. Remember, my friend said before we parted, true confidence isn't loudly announcing your value, it's quietly knowing it. Saturday evening arrived. I emerged from our guest bedroom where I'd been getting ready, dressed in a tailored suit I'd purchased months ago but never worn. The subtle difference was I'd chosen my own accessories, my father's vintage watch instead of the designer one she'd gifted me, a tie with colors I preferred rather than what matched her dress. Her expression when she saw me mixed surprise with suspicion. You look presentable, but we agreed you'd wear the blue tie that complements my dress. I didn't agree to that, I replied evenly. This one suits me better. Before she could argue, the doorbell rang. Showtime. The guests arrived in practiced succession. First, her friend Heather and the hollow-eyed Brian. Then 2 couples I'd never met but who clearly belonged to the same social stratum. Finally, Gregory Hardrove and his wife, the guests of honor around whom this entire theatrical production had been orchestrated. Hardrove was shorter than I expected, with shrewd eyes that evaluated everything they landed on. His much younger wife wore a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. My wife fluttered around, orchestrating the perfect impression, shooting me warning glances whenever I strayed from her script. I noticed her panicked expression when I positioned myself directly next to Hardrove during pre-dinner drinks instead of allowing her prescribed conversation pairings. I understand you've revolutionized route optimization algorithms for the transportation industry, Hardrove said, eyeing me with new interest after I'd explained my role with unexpected eloquence. That's a generous characterization, I replied with a genuine smile. I'd say we've made incremental improvements on existing frameworks. The real innovation is in how we've applied machine learning to predict traffic pattern disruptions. I could practically feel my wife's relief across the room as the conversation progressed smoothly. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't following her script. I was simply being the knowledgeable professional I'd always been, just with more refined delivery. Dinner began, and the choreographed conversations flowed around imported cheese boards and expensive wine. I participated naturally, neither dominating discussions nor shrinking from them. My wife gradually relaxed, likely believing I'd finally seen the light about her social engineering project. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Your wife tells me you're considering properties in Lakeside Hills, Heather said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The neighborhood association is quite selective, but I'd be happy to put in a good word. My wife beamed at this public endorsement of our social worthiness. The perfect opening. Actually, I said pleasantly, we haven't discussed moving there at all. That's news to me. The table fell silent. My wife's smile froze. Though I'm fascinated by this assumption, I continued, my tone conversational but firm, just as I'm fascinated by the elevation circle I've heard about, the one focused on reshaping husbands one at a time. Brian Richardson's fork clattered against his plate. Heather's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about, my wife interjected quickly, laughing nervously. He has such an unusual sense of humor. Not humor at all, I replied calmly. Just curious about this course you've been taking. The one where you learn to correct your husband publicly, to break him down before rebuilding him into something more socially advantageous. Gregory Hardrove's eyebrows rose as he glanced between us. This isn't the time, my wife started, her voice tight. Actually, it's the perfect time, I interrupted smoothly. Since this dinner was orchestrated specifically to showcase how well you've managed to refine me, I turned to address the table collectively. For the past month, my wife has been correcting me in public, my speech, my mannerisms, my stories, even how I hold silverware, all in service of impressing people like yourselves. A fascinating social experiment, wouldn't you say? The silence was deafening. Hardrove studied me with new interest while his wife looked uncomfortably at her plate. Heather appeared ready to bolt from the table. What exactly are you doing? My wife's whisper was barely controlled rage. I smiled genuinely. Being authentic. Isn't that what truly confident people do? I turned to Hardrove. Gregory, I'm not moving to Lakeside Hills. I'm not joining the country club, and I'm definitely not interested in leveraging a dinner party connection to advance my career. If my work and ideas interest you professionally, I'd be happy to schedule a proper meeting through appropriate channels. The stunned silence broke when, unexpectedly, Gregory Hardrove laughed, a genuine, appreciative sound. Finally, he said, raising his glass in my direction. Someone at one of these excruciating dinner parties actually speaking the truth. His wife visibly relaxed, adding, thank God. I was about to fake a migraine to escape. The carefully constructed facade my wife had engineered cracked wide open. The remaining dinner proceeded with remarkably more genuine conversation, though my wife barely spoke, her complexion alternating between flushed anger and pale mortification. As guests departed hours later, Hardrove lingered at the door. I'd actually like to hear more about your logistics optimization work, but not through. He glanced at my silently fuming wife, unusual social channels. Call my office Monday. After closing the door behind the last guest, my wife rounded on me, trembling with rage. You've humiliated me beyond repair. Do you have any idea what you've done? I loosened my tie, suddenly exhausted. Actually, I do. I've reclaimed my dignity. The question is, do you understand what you've been doing to me? Her eyes welled with angry tears. I was trying to help us, to elevate us. No. You were trying to replace me with a version you wouldn't be embarrassed by. I headed upstairs, stopping halfway to look back at her. The irony is Gregory responded to exactly what you've been trying to eliminate: authenticity. As I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the entryway, I knew we'd reached the point of no return. Tomorrow would bring the final act in this painful drama, and a permanent correction to our relationship status. The morning after the dinner party, I woke early and left the house before she stirred. The confrontation at the dinner had been necessary, but I needed space to implement the final phase of my plan. What came next required precision, not heated emotion. I drove to a small cafe across town and opened my laptop. First, I sent a brief professional email to Gregory Hardrove, thanking him for the evening and suggesting a proper business meeting. His response arrived minutes later, direct and appreciative of my refreshing approach. Next, I called my lawyer. We'd already discussed possibilities, and the paperwork was prepared. I gave the authorization to file it with specific timing instructions. My final call was to reserve a table at Le Monde, the upscale French restaurant where we'd had our first date 6 years ago. Symmetry seemed appropriate for what would be our last meal together. When I returned home in the afternoon, the atmosphere was frigid. She was in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning already spotless countertops. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. "About how you deliberately sabotaged months of social networking?" She didn't look up from her scrubbing. "About how you humiliated me in front of everyone who matters?" "No. About dinner tonight. I've made reservations at Le Mans for 8 o'clock. I'd like you to join me." This caught her attention. "Dinner? After what you did?" "Consider it an opportunity for closure. Neutral territory." She studied me suspiciously. "Why would I agree to that?" "Because despite everything, 6 years deserves a proper conversation, not just angry words." Something in my tone must have registered, because her expression shifted slightly. "Fine. 8 o'clock." I nodded and left her to her cleaning. Upstairs in our bedroom, I packed a small overnight bag discreetly. Then I made 2 more calls, one to a trusted colleague offering to take over my current project, and another to a realtor I knew, getting advice on the housing market. Both pieces of a contingency plan I hoped I wouldn't need, but was prepared to execute. At 7:45, we drove to the restaurant in strange silence. She dressed impeccably, armor-like in her perfection. I'd chosen classic simplicity, nothing flashy, nothing that would stand out. Tonight wasn't about appearance, it was about substance. Le Mans welcomed us with soft lighting and the subdued hum of expensive dining. The maitre d' led us to a corner table, private but still within the main dining room, perfect for my purposes. After ordering wine and appetizers, I finally broke our silence. "Do you remember our first time here?" She glanced around, her face softening marginally. "You were so nervous you knocked over the water glass reaching for the bread, and you laughed, not at me, but with me, then told the waiter it was your fault to spare my embarrassment." A flicker of that woman, the one I'd fallen in love with, crossed her features. "Things were simpler then." "They were authentic," I corrected gently. "That's different from simple." Our appetizers arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. I waited until we'd both taken a few bites before continuing. "When did I become a disappointment to you?" I asked directly. "What?" "You never said it in those words. But every correction, every public amendment of my behavior, every strategy session with your elevation circle, they all communicated the same message. I wasn't good enough as I was." She put down her fork. "That's not fair. I was trying to help us both advance." "Advance toward what? A bigger house? Different neighbors? People who judge the value of a man by his zip code rather than his character? You make it sound so shallow." "Because it is shallow. And what hurts most is that you couldn't see that the things you were trying to correct are fundamental parts of who I am." Her eyes flashed defensively. "People evolve. Relationships require compromise. Evolution and erasure are different things. And compromise goes both ways." I leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, what part of yourself were you willing to change? What compromises did you make in this grand social to engineering project?" Her silence was answer enough. The server cleared our plates and brought the main course. I noticed several diners at nearby tables, well-dressed couples engaged in their own relationship rhythms, all witnesses to what would happen next. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. Her expression shifted to weariness. "What is it?" I placed a thick envelope on the table between us. "A correction of my own." She stared at it without touching it. "What does that mean?" "For a month, you've been correcting me in public. My speech, my manners, my very identity, all deemed inadequate and in need of adjustment. I tapped the envelope. Tonight, I'm correcting the one thing that actually needs to be fixed. Our relationship status. Her face drained of color as understanding dawned. Divorce papers? Here? Now? Filed this morning. These are your copies. You can't be serious. Her voice rose slightly, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. I've never been more serious about anything, I said, my voice remaining measured and controlled. For weeks you've treated me as a project rather than a partner. You've conspired with others to break me down so I could be rebuilt according to specifications that weren't mine. You've made unilateral decisions about our future without consultation. This is extreme, she hissed, conscious of the public setting. One dinner party disagreement and you file for divorce? This isn't about one dinner. It's about respect, or rather, the systematic dismantling of it. I gestured to the envelope. Everything's fair. I'm not looking to punish you financially. I just want out. You're making a mistake, she insisted, but her voice had lost its certainty. What about our history? Our plans? Our history is exactly why this hurts so much. And our plans? I shook my head. They became your plans for me, not our plans together. A tear slipped down her cheek, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in weeks. I just wanted us to have more. But at what cost? The price was me, the real me, and that's not a fair exchange. She finally reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. I can change. We can work through this. That's the final irony, I said softly. Now you're willing to change, but only when faced with consequences. That's not growth. It's damage control. I stood, placing money on the table to cover the bill. I'm staying at the West Side Hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'll pick up some clothes while you're at work. We can arrange the rest through lawyers. You're really doing this here, in public? Her voice cracked. Yes, I replied calmly. After a month of public corrections, it seemed fitting that the final correction should also have an audience. The difference is I'm only doing it once. As I walked away, conversation at neighboring tables resumed in hushed tones. I felt dozens of eyes on my back, but for the first time in weeks, the weight of public scrutiny didn't bother me. There was something liberating about taking control of my narrative again. Outside in the cool evening air, I took a deep breath. My phone buzzed with a text from her. This isn't over. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Some corrections are meant to be permanent. 2 days later, Gregory Hardrove's venture capital firm expressed interest in the logistics algorithm I'd developed. 1 week after that, I signed a lease on a new apartment, not in Lakeside Hills, but in a vibrant downtown neighborhood I'd always liked. Sometimes the most important corrections aren't the ones others try to impose on you. They're the ones you make for yourself when you finally recognize your own worth isn't up for public amendment. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.